And yes, we are on online. We are live streaming now. Good morning to everybody who is watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, also Facebook, and listening to us in Clubhouse. It's our pleasure to have you with us again on this midweek day on Wednesday, April the 17th. I know that for some of you it's quite early, and we appreciate you coming to our podcast this early. And today I want to say also that we have another very special speaker for whom it's maybe too late at night, just past midnight. We have Carlos Ramos Fuentes with us today, who is currently in Spain, near Madrid, in a very, very romantically sounding town, Salamanca.
Well,
Yes,
languages do it to you.
right. Yes. And Carlos, good morning or good night to you. It's really difficult to get it right, at this point of time. Thank you very much for agreeing to be our guest speaker and welcome to our podcast. So, to everybody who is meeting you for the first time, Carlos is a teacher of Japanese, and you teach Japanese language proficiency test level 1, right?
Yes,
Yes,
that's my
it's
specialty.
amazing. Yes, I had so much difficulty, passing that level here in Japan, and I cannot imagine how tough it is to teach it actually. So today we're going to talk about how learning Japanese might or might not change your personality. We don't know that, but Carlos has some very nice findings there, and we invite everybody who is listening or watching us actually to chime in and share your experiences in the comments on LinkedIn or YouTube. Also, if you're in Clubhouse, just join us later on stage, and let's dive straight into it. Carlos, it's on you now to tell us your connection to Japan, your story, and also, you know, tell us what you have found out so far. Yes.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me speak. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Maya. And thank you, everyone who's watching. Can't really see your faces, but I'm trying not to be very nervous. So, as you guys know, my name is Carlos. I had a very interesting relationship with Japan. I started, well, when I was 18, I entered university here at the same university where I'm doing. I'm sorry, my back just dropped.
That's fine.
Um, that's okay.
Yeah.
I majored in translation at the same university where I'm doing my PhD right now, the University of Salamanca. And when I got into my major, I was supposed to choose a language apart from English and Spanish. And I had the choice of doing either German, French, or Japanese. And I did not know what to do, but I thought, well, everyone's really learning French, everyone's learning German. I mean, I should be doing something else. And I dove into Japanese for apparently no reason. I really enjoyed it. On my second year of university, I was sent to Doshisha University in Kyoto. And yeah, after that, I finished my degree. I did a master's degree in Eastern Asia's business and culture. And then I got scouted by a Japanese company to work in Japan as an event producer, which I did between 2018 and 2019. I had a bit of a very, very interesting and very, very varied experience in Japan. I was working at a full-on Japanese company. As you probably know, well, unfortunately, it was a black company, a Brakukigyo, but it was okay. I quit soon.
Right. Carlos, it's interesting. One thing stood out to me when you started talking and you said, I chose Japanese for no reason. And I think that apparently there was no reason, but there is probably something very deep there because I think that only people who really love challenges, they dive or they choose Japanese or like say Arabic or maybe other Asian languages for no reason. So it's fascinating how the expressions go, right? So there was, oh, you chose it for no reason, and then now you're here and you're teaching, the most difficult level, the most difficult language, one of the most difficult languages, and the highest level to other people to learn. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to chime in because it stood out to me, and it's we sometimes talk about such reasons with Tim, what
Yeah.
makes people choose these languages or come to these countries and so on. Sorry, please go on.
No, but absolutely, that's a very, very valid question, and I mean, I get it all the time. Like, why? But more than why did you start? Why did you stay? Right? Because a lot of people really start and then they really kind of stop. Um, I think the thing that fascinated me the most was kanji because as a Spanish speaker, I mean, I grew up in Spain, but I also lived in Texas when I was in high school with a scholarship. And for me, using like Roman characters, Dolmaji was like, yeah, that's the only way around, right? Like, why would you use 2,000 characters if you can just use like 25 or 26? So there was something really, really fascinating, and I've always loved riddles. And I think kanji really, took me to that place where it's like it seems really, really complicated. Why such a, why the third power in the world is using this such complicated system that apparently makes no sense. And then when you get into knowing it, and you're like, okay, now it kind of makes sense. Now I kind of want to know more about it. Now I can read texts faster and I can skim it because I can understand the concept and everything. So I don't know. I think kanji played a big role, but obviously, well, what I did my stay in Japan and my ryugaku, my overseas stay in Doshisha University, that was also very enjoyable. The company where I worked at, it wasn't that great, but the things that I did there as an event producer were also pretty cool.
Hmm.
And thanks to that, I had a lot of relationships that I still keep and I cherish to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, I just about the kanji. It's
Hmm.
I agree with you. You go into it and you're like, at least, just use hiragana, right? But then when you start studying Japanese, it's actually harder to understand what they're saying in hiragana because there's so many homonyms, right? In
Right.
the language, right? And then the other thing that I kind of discovered by accident, there's this psychological process in my head because I was raised in Western culture that when I read something, I
Hmm.
have to know how it's pronounced before I can
Mm.
consider the meaning, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I recall many times my wife, I'll say, like, how do you read that? And she goes, I don't know, but it means this. And that was like a light bulb went on. I'm like, oh my God, she's skipping the transformation of, the sound and then the meaning. And it's
Absolutely.
going right into her head, the meaning directly. It's like this more efficient way. And I had to get comfortable with not being able to read it, but knowing what the kanji meant. Like it took my brain a while to look at it in that way. Did you have any of that going on with you during your studies?
I think it took me. I mean, every time that it caters to me. Now, I mean, I still get, of course, many kanji that different readings when you're reading novels, when you're doing different kind of things. And I think for me, it really takes me to that particular time when I was in kindergarten, because I mean, Spanish is it's even easier than English. We usually learn how to read and write when we're 4 years old because all the, every A is going to be pronounced A, every E is going to be pronounced E. We don't really have exceptions. So we just learn it, and every time I still encounter, a word that I can't read, it takes me back when I was like 4 and trying to figure out that, this is red B or this is red C. So fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember struggling with the same concept, Tim, up here. And I also remember a funny thing because, yeah, when a friend of mine came here and we were driving somewhere, we were in Sapporo at that time. And what happened was that there was a big billboard. And there was something there, that was like, how many times something happens or you use something like nankai or nanfun, and how long you use it measured in minutes. And then
Mhm.
my friend asked me, okay, why does this kanji look like a house? And I'm like, what does it mean, this kanji? And she was referring to the kanji for minutes, nanpun or,
Oh,
right? And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, does it look like a house really? And then when I saw, when I thought about it and tried to step into her shoes, and I thought, oh yes, it does indeed. But it's always interesting because from our perspective, our Western perspective, every kanji looks a little bit, it reminds us of something different,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the meaning is different to it. At least to me, it was different, than it meant than what it meant here in Japan. So like nanpun, how many minutes, and then the kanji looks like a house, and then in my head, at least, it was really difficult to reconcile these differences of perception and meaning. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And just on the topic of why do they use this complicated writing system, of course, we all know the history. They force fit Chinese characters into a completely different language. So now they got to make up hiragana so they can put, because of the grammar, positions,
Right.
right? Ni or wa or ga. And so they had to do that. And then I don't know why they said, oh, well, we need katakana too, because there's foreign words, right? And once in a while, they even put, romaji in there. So you got four different systems sometimes all mixed into their text. And what's amazing is, last I checked, the literacy level here was like 98, 99%. So they have the most complicated written language in the world, and they have a extremely high literacy rate, which is amazing to me. But go ahead, just a quick comment.
yes, yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing is, I think the most beautiful thing about it is that it actually makes a lot of sense. Like once you dive into the language and you're like, okay, yeah, it makes sense for to use kanji. It makes sense to use hiragana. It makes sense to use katakana. And it's true that it's a hurdle when you start, but once you know it and you can, it's really helpful. It might take you a little time, a little longer to maybe write by pen, but if you write on your computer, if you read and everything, it's actually kind of it's faster and it's fun. Also, I don't know, it's really really cool.
Yes, indeed. And so if you don't mind, of course, let's dive into the main topic of,
Absolutely.
right? How or does it really learning Japanese change your personality? Because you have experience in teaching it and you have observed your students, and I'm sure that you have observed yourself as well when you were learning it. So, what are your findings here?
Absolutely. Well, I'm doing my thesis right now. My thesis is on, I've developed a methodology of rapid acquisition of Japanese for both English and Spanish speakers. One of the main premises rather than findings that I actually discovered through both teaching and doing research is that language is really political. We construct what we want to say based on beliefs that people have created before us. This seems really really complicated, but it's really not, right? We have like a series of words that we use in our everyday vocabulary, but unless we have a word for a specific reality, we can't name it, right? So
Right,
if we have, I don't know, a very simple concept, like if I'm not a Christian, I may not know what Christmas means, and but maybe because I was raised in a Christian household, I'm like, okay, it means this, and also I have attached feelings specifically to this word, both as an individual and both culturally, right, as a group, either in
yeah,
my family, either in my village, either in my country as a whole. And one of the things that really mesmerized me reading about Japanese was how intertwined all these different cultural frameworks that could encompass like things like masculinity and femininity, politeness and rudeness, neutrality and familiarity. They are really built into the language. So things, for instance, like pronouns. In English, we only have one pronoun. Well, for the first person, right? We say I. We can conjugate it depending on grammatical formulas. It can become me. It can become my. But it never refers to anything else other than the self. And it's very neutral because me, a 29-year-old, is going to be using I in the same way that a 60-year-old is going to be using I. People of different gender, people of different social status. And that's something that does not really happen in Japanese, which leads us to the question: does really I exist in Japanese? And we don't really, there's not really an answer, right? Or maybe the answer is maybe not, because it's really attached to all these different, like watashi, boku, ore mean all very, very, very different things. We can gather information about the person who's speaking by the pronouns they use. And this is not only related to the pronouns, it's also related to the words we use, the grammar we use. So even though the meaning is there, all the cultural associations, all the connotations that occur in Japanese, we don't really have them, or we don't really have them that explicitly on the English framework. Sorry, maybe I'm going a little bit too
No,
specialist.
no. Actually, I think I like the way you framed it. Like, does I
Mhm.
exist? And I, in college, I was forced at gunpoint to read a book by Sugiyama, Libra Sugiyama. She's a professor at University of Hawaii, and it was called Japanese Patterns of Behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot. It was a boring, dry cultural anthropology book, but because I was here, it actually, a lot of light bulbs turned on, right? And she made one point that stuck with me. She said, yeah, in Japan, it's a collectivist culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she said the Japanese word for oneself is jibun, one's part. You are a fraction of the whole. You are just a part of the whole, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that relates directly to the concept of the self as maybe not being this standalone independent entity, and rather a fraction of the larger society or whatever group is around you. So that was a kind of an interesting observation. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I mean that indeed that is really that. If we don't have any, and if we don't have the other in order to compare the self doesn't exist, right? So it
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense that if I use atashi, watashi, boku, ore, if I don't have anyone to say it to, then it doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's really, really, really interesting. All of these so all these grammar, all these concepts that we have that are entangled in the language, we usually use them without really understanding how, right? I mean, it also happens in our mother tongue. My mother tongue is both I come from a bilingual region. We also speak a minority language called Galician, which is very similar to Portuguese. But it's funny how even in similar languages, the concepts that we express are different, and then that's how we get stereotypes, right? Japanese people are this way, Spanish people are that way, because the way we speak or because the way we try to present ourselves. And yeah, I think it's just really, really interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, I also think it's very interesting. It can be fascinating because at the end of the day, I think that the culture is formed because of many factors, but there is so much historical context there, and there is so much cultural context there. And it's to me, it is like the that question about the chicken and the egg, which comes first, but probably not. None of them comes first. They just evolve together. And we have a comment on LinkedIn from Hiroko-san. She says, I would say it definitely, well, she's talking about the impact of the language
Mm-hmm.
on the personality, but also it is, once again, these are so intricately interwoven. So she writes, I would say it definitely impacts or at least influences your personality because language is a part of culture. So you're acquiring not only a language, but also a new culture. And yes, so it is really, I think that at the end of the day, probably we realize how difficult it is to stay detached from the culture of the language you're learning. But also, once again, it's about how you change your personality or how it changes your personality, right? And I don't
Yeah,
want to jump to conclusions too soon in into our conversation. So let's continue. Sorry.
absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things, well, this is also related to, yeah, the cycle of language and culture. And one of the things that, well, made me really interested in the language that was the concept of polite language versus plain language, right? We have
Yes.
something like this in Spanish. We have the vous, the French vous, which we call it usted. But interestingly enough, if you use usted, we usually only use usted with people who are really old when we want to help, I don't know, like a lady cross the street. We use it
Hmm.
with priests. Older people use it with their parents. My mom uses like this quego usted with her mom. But it can come across as really rude if you use it with someone who is not old enough, because they might think, oh, do I look old? Like, why are you using polite language with me? And
Right.
it's such a different perspective compared to Japanese, where it's completely the other way around. If you're not using polite language with the people that you should be using polite language with, then it comes across as really, really rude or really, really intimate. And it's like, oops, this is a little too much. Um, so yeah, one of the things that really surprised me when I started teaching, and I was starting I was teaching people who are in a very, very, very early level. I usually start teaching with the plain language. So instead of tabemas, with taberu and nomu. And at the very beginning, I had this iwakan, kind of like a strange feeling, because this person that I didn't really know about was talking to me in plain language. We were just like, obviously that was the only tool they had at the time, right? Because they didn't really have polite language at the time. But it made me even more aware about the fact that, wow, this really is reducing um, the distance, the psychological distance that I have with this person, and I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. So yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just gonna say I agree with everything you said, especially you don't use the proper polite language towards
Mm.
somebody and you can offend them. But like everything in Japan, it's situational, and everything you can say, you can also say the opposite.
Right.
And so if you have two friends that are kind of close, but one gets really angry, that person might start using polite language as a passive aggressive way
Mm.
to, because now you're offended because suddenly they're using Keigo and you thought you were friends and that you had gotten past that and you can use this intimate language with each other rather than Keigo. So it's a way of distancing and giving that message that, something ticked you off. So everything is nuanced here, right? And as far as, to Hiroko-san's point, I made so many mistakes when I first got here. And because I started learning Japanese where I could say things that, I could translate my thoughts,
Right.
interpret my own thoughts, right? And it got me in trouble because I wasn't adapting to the rules of the road in Japan because I didn't know what the rules of the road were. I was imposing my rules of the road innocently,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're not getting the response that you wanted, right? And I wish I had read Edward T. Hall before I started studying Japanese, because the way he defines, intercultural communication, he goes, it's not about sending the right message. It's about getting a desired response, which means you're being strategic. It's, language is strategic, right? So if you want to get somebody to respond a certain way, and only by being around Japanese can you really get a feel for it, because you listen to how they do it versus how you would have done it,
Right.
and it kind of rubs off, which goes back to the point of your personality, how it changes.
Absolutely. I think it happens. We're not really aware when we're thinking about very, very similar language or more similar languages, like Indo-European languages. We have things in Spanish. Instead of saying in English, we can say, if I want to offer you a Coke, I might say, do you want a Coke? But in Spanish, we probably say like something like, do you feel like having a Coke? Right? So it's a little more indirect. I think the more interesting thing about Japanese is that you are forced to make those choices because everything is explicit. In specifically, the masculinity is explicit, the femininity is explicit. So also the neutrality. So you always have to make conscious choices about what you say, and that creates an image of you that other people perceive. And it's like, oh wow, this person is really using polite language, or he's talking like a foreigner. And then they create that image of you upon those
Yeah.
conscious choices that you make, but maybe you don't have other tools to have to access,
Mm-hmm.
Or what you don't say, you know.
or when you don't say
So,
Oh, yeah.
so it's funny when you talk about choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you go to someone's house in Japan, and this is a thinking that's embedded from Confucianism that Japanese aren't even aware of. It's just so deeply part of it. But you know, if you go to someone's house and they say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" You're supposed to say no. You're supposed to refuse 3 times. And so what the Japanese do, they go, "Okay, I'm going to ask them," and they're going to say no. So you know what? I'm just going to give them a cup of tea. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to put it in front of them, whether they want it or not. And you see that behavior as well, like what's not being said, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. And to your point, Carlos, about how you make you teach either the plain form or the polite form here. And I remember when I first started studying Japanese, so my teachers they taught me only the maske, which is the polite form. That's how I started,
Right,
and
right.
I believe because. It was 22 years ago already, and maybe the reason for that was because I was a woman, and okay. Anyway, but women here are supposed to be, yes, supposed to be polite and more accommodating and so on and so on. And that mask case has it stood what stuck with me for such a long time, and I would use it even at home. And it was strange, at home I was using the maske and everybody around me was using the plain form. And they would ask me, why do you speak so politely? And I said, because I don't feel comfortable using the plain form.
You
And
were
that's,
brainwashed.
yes. And of course, to the point, so also Timothy Langley, he made a comment on LinkedIn saying, oh, you were so what was scary before you started learning Japanese. So, of course, like the Japanese, to me at least, it made me at least look more polite and more composed. And,
So it softened your image.
yes, but I would say that it did so not so much because of the maske, which is the polite form here. It made me so because it was very humiliating to learn it and to realize that I couldn't learn it the way I learned the other Indo-European languages, right? So
Right.
it was
This is
very
very true.
humbling actually. So
I
this the
think we
whole
have specifically for Japanese. There's the problem with textbook Japanese, how it's so much more different than actual Japanese that is being spoken. In my current university, and I study how translation is used in textbooks so that I can create a textbook that reflects how actually people speak. And we still see, you probably have heard of the Mina no Nihongo. Now people are using Genki, goodness, Japanese for business.
oh yeah. Yes.
There's also this series. Well, there's many series. But I remember when I started studying with Mina no Nihongo, and that was not that long ago. It was like 10 years ago or so. And it's still the book that is being used, and I was made to use what I was teaching here at Salamanca. And the forms, well, first of all, the explanations, a lot of them were really hard to understand because they were directly translated from English into Spanish, but I think it was translated by people who didn't really speak Japanese, so the grammar was really poorly explained. But also the forms that were taught, maybe we're not really that aware of them, but things like people don't really say "tabemasen." It sounds a little bit too katakurushi, a little bit too formal. People go for the "nai" plus this form. "Ah, so amari tabenai desu ne." So it's so interesting how we're making foreigners or learners of Japanese learn a Japanese that is not really being spoken, or it's spoken but the um, aura that you show when you actually use this kind of language, like, I don't know, masen deshita, shinakereba narimasen, all of these forms that are being taught, and we're not really focusing on the more used things like and particles like yo ne yone, where students really have a lot more trouble grasping and understanding what they really mean, um, and really not focusing on automating the grammar points that are actually being used, like the nai this form, shinai to ikenai form, which are actually more simple. So I think yes, we need to understand as a Japanese learners. Sometimes we're not really getting what we really should be getting if we wanted to sound maybe if we wanted to find a more natural way of explaining ourselves. I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, for sure. I remember. Sorry, I just what you say, Carlos, brings up so many memories of my learning Japanese because of those forms. For example, shinakereba naranai, and also the keigo, like itadakimasu or shitsurei shimasu, and such things when you leave the room. I remember how when I was into that stage of learning the keigo, my
Mhm.
classmates and we came from Western cultures, and then it was so difficult to make ourselves say "osaki ni shitsurei shimasu" because we didn't feel like we had offended anybody.
Right. Yes.
It was like the rebellion part or the rebellious part of our characters, came up so very strongly in those classes. And our Japanese teacher, she had to explain, no, 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 this is just an expression. You haven't offended anybody and you don't have to worry about this, right? But it is, a figure of speech, so don't worry
Right.
about it. And it still took us time to get used to it, and to nail down that rebelliousness.
On a very similar note, and I saw this when I was teaching customer service to Americans who were serving the Japanese market. I said,
Mhm.
if you can learn just one thing out of this seminar, learn to apologize when it's not your fault. Because
Yes.
everyone's like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. It doesn't matter. The Japanese will know you didn't do anything wrong. You're apologizing on behalf of your group. And they will respect you more for, taking one for the team as long as you recover from the mistake and show them that you really care. Like you can actually use it to your advantage, right? And then there, all these expressions like "otsukare-sama deshita," Mr. Tired. Are you kidding me? That's what we're saying, Mr. Tired, though, right? And it's hard to wrap your head around it. But when you're in it and you see it done every day, you attach
Mm.
context to it. And there's other expressions that yappari. What does that really mean? As one would think, but we don't say that. But you get in this habit of saying yappari, and I still don't know how to translate ichio. Ichio,
It's
what that really
for the
mean
time
in
being.
English? I'm not sure. Yeah, kinda, you know. So like,
Yeah.
but you lose from context because we don't really have direct
Mhm.
translations of that in our language, right? Contextually,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Absolutely.
So, yes. Before we jump or we move forward, I want to also invite Ren. Ren is in Clubhouse now, and Ren, I am really apologize for keeping you waiting for so long.
It's
And
Oh
no,
no,
no, no.
no, no, no. This is fine. Can you can you hear me? Can
Yes.
Yes.
you hear me clearly?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, good, good. Sorry, I am driving, so I couldn't see the gentleman's name from Salamanca. What is his
Carlos.
name?
Carlos.
Carlos.
Carlos. Hi, I was in Uterela last year in November. Last
Ooh.
year's October in Uterela. It's one of the three flamenco's
Mm.
most important cities, right? Sevilla, Mozzarella, and then also the third city I forgot. But I was there. I just want to say how beautiful your country is. I love your country, and then thank you. Well, I just want to sidetrack, just take a side step before I get into the Japanese discussion. So
Yes.
yeah,
Wonderful. Okay.
okay. So as you know, my parents were in Taiwan when I was born. So
Mm.
I was, and my parents wanted me to play with the local kids. So they didn't send me to a Japanese school or American school. So I actually went to a local school. So when I was sent back to Japan, when I was 10 years old, I was actually not very fluent in Japanese. So I had to learn from the from the start when I was 10 years old. So in a sense, Maya, Timothy, I'm like you. I feel like I was
Mm.
a foreigner when I was in Japan when I was 10 years old boy.
Yeah.
and I felt the Japanese is a completely different language from the Mandarin I was speaking when I was in Taiwan until I was 9 years old. And later, I think somebody told me this, but according to the linguistic experts, there's something called high context and low context language. And the high context language means that you have to read between the lines. There are a lot of meanings in one sentence, right? And then the
Yes.
low context language means just what it means. It didn't mean more than that.
Right.
And I was told the Japanese language is at the very high end of the high context does not mean it is a better language. This is not about who is better. This is about the context, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And then the lowest context language was actually Dutch. Did you
Oh,
know that? I didn't know
no,
Dutch
I
was the
didn't.
lowest context.
Yeah.
Dutch is very straightforward. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that? I mean, there's no context involved here. There's no high context here. So
It's funny.
Maybe.
I just met somebody from Holland. They came and visited in Atami, and it's funny. To Ren's point, I have a German friend, and he once said to me, "Tim, you think us Germans are direct? You should meet my Dutch friends. They're like really brutally direct. Even we think they are." So it sounds right to me.
Yeah.
yeah. So, and I also want to say that thank you for those of you who signed the competition. Signed the petition to prevent or to keep Japanese language programs or classes alive in my school district here in my township here near Philadelphia. We actually, our public school here is one of the rare public schools where Japanese language is one of the selections for the high school kids.
Wow.
And they are trying to shut it down because a Japanese high school teacher passed away, and then it seems like they're trying to take the advantage of that to cut down the budget. And then
That's unfortunate.
the reason I mentioned this is not just to thank you, but also to let you know that there is actually a mother whose daughter won the national competition of Japanese language high school in the entire United States.
Wow.
So they wrote a very moving, very touching letter to the school board why you must keep Japanese language be taught in public school and don't kill it. You know, that letter, I wish I could show it to you, but I cannot because it's a privacy issue, right? But they mentioned a lot of things about why Japanese changed her life. She has been a very quiet girl. Most of the students will learn. In our school district, you can choose French, Spanish, Latin, and Japanese. And so Japanese language is the only language that is not European. So learning the language itself means learning the culture itself. And you also change the way you think. So even though her daughter is quiet, shy, but she knew but the Japanese language gave her a way to express what she wants to say without being too assertive. So the Japanese language, she found her voice, inner voice, should I say, through Japanese language, which is not, well, I should say, is less aggressive, even though you want to make a very strong, assertive opinion statement, right?
Yeah.
And that really helped her, is what she told me. And this is not a Japanese American or Chinese American. This is a typical European American mother and daughter who fell in love with Japanese language. And the way they describe and the letter they sent to our school board someday, if I have the permission for them, I would like to publish it. But because we are right in the middle of fighting with the school to keep the Japanese language class alive.
So,
Which
Ren,
is
yes, Ren, is that petition
yeah.
still alive? Because I remember signing it.
Yes, it is still alive.
And where can it be
Yes.
found?
Yes,
Yeah.
it is still alive.
Yeah, because
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, he can't. He's driving. I was going to
he's
say that.
okay. Maybe later, if you can publish it on LinkedIn, Facebook, so that more people can sign it, and that would be very nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, please.
Thank you. I believe on my LinkedIn, I already posted it, so I will send. I will just repost it or something like that.
Yes,
But
please do.
it is. I think we think it very. I mean, there are some rich private boarding schools. They offer Japanese language, which is not special because they are rich.
Right. Okay.
What is special is the public schools offering Japanese language.
Indeed.
And I'm proud of our township doing that. So I'm doing everything I can to make sure it will survive, not only survive but also thrive.
Yes.
And so through that effort, I found many good people in the nation, in this country, that are supporting me and thinking the Japanese language is something that a lot of American students, American high school students should learn, because it's different from the Mandarin also, because I was in Taiwan, as I told you, right?
Yeah.
So I think Mandarin is more like English, more straightforward. I think the Japanese, even though they also use kanji, but the way they think before the first word comes out from their mouth are different between the Chinese and Japanese.
Right.
I would say the Chinese are more like English-speaking people.
Yeah. Yes.
So that being said, I do want to mention this. I want to pick you. I do want to ask you, everybody here, actually, what you think, because again, my linguistic friend told me that there are two camps about this theory. Some of them believe this is truth. The others do not believe this. That is, the Japanese language origin comes from a Central Asia part of, maybe, I don't know, Kazakhstan or those part of Asia. That's where the roots is. And the language traveled east, then they went through Mongol, Korea, and arrived at Japan, where the dead end is. So the Japanese language and the Korean language and the Mongolian language have a lot of similarities. And then the other traveling was to the west. So they went through the Baltic nations, Estonia, and also Hungary, and eventually reached Finland. So Finland and Japanese are the two far dead end of the same family of this language. And I don't know if you believe that, but I did listen to Estonian, because I have an Estonia piano. So I was listening to the Estonia piano people talking about how they make piano in Estonia. The way they speak were just like Japanese. But like ta 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 ta, it's not like the English. So if you're interested in what I just said, please Google or maybe YouTube search Estonia piano, and you can hear their language. It is, I think, it's similar to Japanese.
Yes,
so I want to ask you.
I'm sorry. Just
do you agree with? Sorry, I should stop it here.
No, because we're talking about languages and how languages, by basically learning those languages, influence your personality. And I appreciate what you said. And I think that we need to have another session about that, the origin of languages and how they spread actually throughout the world. And yes, I agree with you that there are different theories, but maybe we can go back to the topic today and, revisit your question next time.
Right.
We have Carlos with us.
Okay, so
I do.
Yes.
Wait, Yuka-san. Before I let the microphone get to you, I do want to mention that I see a lot of similarities of personalities between the Finnish people and the Japanese people.
Right.
I don't know if this is because of the language. Finnish people, my former boss was a Finnish guy, and then he told me a lot of things about Finland. It appears that the Finnish are the most shy Europeans in Europe. For example, they never say "I love you" even after they get. I was told they don't say "I love you" even after they get married. The time to say "I love you" to their wife is when the wife is about to pass away or something like that. So
Right.
it's very in the bus, in public transportation, they try to avoid eye contact. So when I heard those things, I felt like okay, there's a country like that that is very similar to Japan. I'm going to leave that with you, but I just want to point that out.
Yeah,
You
thank
got
you.
your.
Oh, thank you. Because yeah, so, it's 50 minutes that we have. So I kind of like to ask Carlos a question about how sort of learning Japanese, you know, change his personality. So when I was thinking, because I'm sort of like an opposite, by the way, I probably should have been born as a Dutch because I'm kind of direct.
Okay.
So, when the people think that, I'm sort of native Japanese woman, especially not only Japanese, I'm a woman, there are some certain image that tend to sort of pose on me. But, once I open my mouth, people sometimes get surprised. But anyway, when I was thinking about, like, sometimes I translate financial document from English to Japanese, and I'm sorry, Japanese to English. And then, we you guys are talking about sometimes, and then quite often, even in those kind of like an analytical document, Japanese skip the subject. And then I
Right.
have to, when I'm writing in English, I have to put, subject. And then sometimes, like, maybe that's what he meant. And sometimes I have to go back to the writer and get the clarification. And to me, sometimes, like, that's kind of frustrating to me. To me, English, if I can say so, English is more logical. I know, like you guys are talking about, the Japanese high context. So you have to read between lines. Maybe because of the fact, when I translate from Japanese to English, I'm having a tough time reading between lines. So, so that's why when I'm sort of from Japanese to, when I'm speaking in English, I think I'm maybe using more logical part of my brain. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
There are studies that say that actually thinking your a second language, learning a language that is not your native language, makes us helps us into making more objective decisions. I think this is probably because we've learned the language, we don't really have those associate we have all the associations that we have with the language in particular. We have acquired them consciously, right? Unlike our native language, where things happen kind of like, we're not really sure where we're getting all that information, where all the feelings that the word have from, right? So I would say, specifically for my own journey, I think instead of personality, I think it's about more about personas, the different type of the ways we express ourselves using different languages, and I think they kind of get mingled in between. I think that would be the conclusion for the for the meeting. We do get a little bit of the Spanish persona mixed in the Japanese persona into the English persona and so on and so forth, but they also retain certain number of characteristics. I think
Okay,
that's
very. That's a great point that you just made. I'm sorry I cut you off. But so the difference between personality and the persona.
Mhm.
Personality is your sort of inherent, character that you're born with, so to speak, and the persona is like the image that you are projecting to the outside world. Or I'm not taking this right.
Yes, persona would be,
Online.
yes, it's a little bit more conscious and a little bit more active, and it's the way we try to showcase ourselves into the world, right? And we make our conscious choices depending on the things that we're actually saying, and that does depend a lot on language, because the language restrains us. It all gives us clues or gives us tools in order to communicate what we mean, but it also restrains us in certain ways. However, personality is a little bit more general. how we are, how we feel, depending on things, which is a little bit less related to language in particular. I think that's a little bit the difference. It's not exactly clear, but it's a little bit on those lines. Yeah.
No, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I learned, something new again. Thank you.
No, thank you. And to me
Thank you
also,
for chiming in, Yuka. We always appreciate that, especially because you're doing the mirror image. You're a Japanese who went to America. And, it's funny you mentioned how you're very direct. Part of you may have been direct from the beginning, and that maybe was the appeal,
mhm,
of even getting married to an American, for example. But part of it, I think, also you were influenced as well. It's kind of this dynamic interplay. My wife's the same. She's pretty direct. And then she lived in America for 30 years, and I think she became even more direct.
mhm.
However, by American standards, she's still kind of indirect. But by
Oh,
Japanese standards, she's very direct. You know what I mean?
mm,
Yeah,
yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? So
yeah.
we got, yes, a comment from Tommy Twobats on YouTube, and Tommy
Mhm.
writes, sometimes I speak Japanese to Japanese people, and they speak English back to me, and we carry on through an entire awkward conversation this way. It is like a war. Is it pride? What is going on? So this is the comment here.
I've encountered this many, many, many times. I think it's something that have we have to understand where people are coming from, and we look as foreigners, we look different than a person, I don't know, a regular person that is raised in Japan. And all these people that they want. I think we have to understand where they're coming from. They want to be like, oh, this person probably doesn't speak Japanese. Let's speak English to them because they'll understand.
Mhm.
Of course, this leads to very, very funny outcomes. I remember one time I was lost and I had to go to the police station, and I asked the cop like, "How can I get to the station?" or something like that. And he replied in Japanese, but instead of saying "migi and hidari," he kept on saying "daito lefto." Daito magatte kudasai. その後はレフト magatte kudasai. I'm like, oh, はい、わかりました. So
Indeed.
I
Yeah.
think um, instead of taking it like a war, I think we have to take it as we have to keep open, keep
Mm.
our personas open, understand where people are coming from, and also understand that it's such a funny story to tell people later on. So yeah, and eventually, I think once you get to know the right people, that'll happen eventually. Less you'll be speaking
Is
more.
that me? Oh, okay, he's back.
Yes, yes, back. Okay, so we have Martin also in Clubhouse. Martin, thank you very much for coming up on stage. You're muted now, and I apologize for keeping you waiting. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can, Maya.
Wonderful. Yes,
Thanks very much to give me opportunity to talk
thank you.
in the room. Well, I come to these rooms sometimes if I'm not busy, and then I see the topic: does learning Japanese change your personality? Well, if I know something, I'd like to share with other people. That's why I came to the
Yes, please
stage to
do.
talk about this.
Yes.
Well, first I should tell you why I went to Japan. Yeah, I lived in Japan for 4 years.
Yes.
And, actually, maybe you don't believe it, but I didn't know I'm going to Japan. And then I arrived in Japan. I tell you what happened. Okay, well, I was very good in a school, maybe the best one. It was in Iran. And in 1981, they closed all the university, and my dream is gone.
Oh, okay.
12 years, I was best in the school, maybe sometime in a state. Number 3, number 2 in a state. Anyway, and all my dream is gone. Then I involved in the street fighting, because now when I go back to that time, street fighting, and then I get involved pretty badly. Then I had to leave the country. No passport. And then I hide myself in the cargo ship. And because they told me it's going to Australia, my dream. Then it went to Japan, actually. A long story. By a few days, they let me get in Japan. I mean, the immigration takes like 7 days. Anyway, I went to Japan, and then after a few months, I said, well, mate, you came to Japan. I didn't know I want to go to Japan, but what can I do? I studied very hard Japanese, and then from then I back to where I was to.
Okay,
And
so did the Japanese language help you in any way, or did it change you in any way?
yes, it changed me a lot because when I start to learn Japanese language, then I start to get involved in Japanese culture.
Mm-hmm.
It was very different. And then I said, if I want to understand more about Japanese culture, I better write and read the book or newspaper. Then I get involved to reading the kanji.
Right. So
And I changed a lot on the positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you go to other country or when you travel to overseas, you plan from before. I didn't have any plan. All happened in 2 weeks.
Oh,
just
right.
The cargo ship is going to Australia. Yes, let's go there. And then it went to the Hong Kong, from Hong Kong to Japan. And Japan, when I arrived in Japan, they didn't want to let me in. The refugee part of the United Nations, it get involved. It was on the news for a few days. Should we let this man? And then more refugee coming from Middle East, all of those one. And then it was not my interest, I said, wow, the next country going is Finland, then they will take me, it's okay. And they said, no, you can get off. And I was shocked, actually. What? What is Japan? I really don't know much about Japan. And then for first 1 month, I was shocked. What can I do? Why I came in here for? But then I understand, well, this is not my choice. But it seems for me I'm going to stay in Japan for a pretty long time. And then I said, okay, let's see positive. And then I studied Japanese. And then it really changed my personality a lot. I see the equality between man and woman. I understand what is my right in this new country. I have got something for right, which is in the European country we have, and also we didn't have in my own country. And if they don't pay me the right salary, I can against it. I can tell them, Yeah. And usually they pay me. Usually the same as other Japanese, And 本当にそれが結構私の人生としては変わった。
Right. Yeah, I think
すごく変わった。
Yes. I think that all of us.
日本に行ってよかったと思った、その後は。
That's wonderful to hear, because I believe that the people, everybody who goes to a different country, but we're talking about Japan here, so and everybody who has come to Japan or studied Japanese or its culture, we have gone through a transformation, and that transformation is always different, and there are patterns there. And thank you very much for sharing your story, Martin, and for you telling us that, basically this, the transformation was into a positive direction and in a positive way. This is what also we have been trying to achieve here, help people actually get to terms with these huge cultural differences. And Carlos, back to you now. Thank you so very much for being with us. It's almost 9 o'clock, but I know that we haven't exhausted this topic. So we haven't exhausted it. And it means, that what I'm going to say next is, please come back again and let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, we can talk about this forever. This was really interesting.
Yes.
And just one kind of final comment from me. Mm-hmm. You really understand how much Japan affected you when you go back to your own country after you've been here for a while. So I was here for 10 years and I went back and I felt like a foreigner in my own country And
Mm.
I found that a lot of people had trouble maybe relating to the way I looked at things or framed things. And it's a subtle change over a 10-year period, and you don't realize yourself how much you change. So that's kind of how I would encapsulate my experience. But thank you, Carlos. Please give us your closing comments, and as Maya said, we'd love to have you back again.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure. I'd love to come here again. Yeah, for me particularly, I mean, Japan is what Japanese language specifically, it was putting food on my table. So I'm really, really grateful for the language. Really grateful for the adventures that has brought to me. I think at the end of the day, learning a new language, specifically a language that is really, really, really different, it opens, it widens horizons, it gives you new ideas. It
Mm.
makes you think that things that you thought were normal are normal, and they make you
Right.
understand why that is. Right? There's no normal. Everything is normal. Everyone is normal, and that's what makes life fun, I suppose.
Right. Yes. Oh, thank you so very much for this comment. It's beautiful. That's
Yeah,
what I'm going
Carlos,
to
I
say.
love your positive energy. So please come back. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you. I did really want to talk. I did really want to say, well, that when we have a meeting, another meeting later on, I'd love to talk a little bit about haiku, because when I was in Japan, I did the
Oh yeah.
pilgrimage. I reenacted the pilgrimage of Matsuo Basho from 1689, and my book, the biography of Matsuo Basho in Spanish, the first now, is going to
All
come
right.
up in the summer. So sorry
Very
for
good.
Okay, so we want you to be back here then, and let's talk about the book once it is out, and just talk about haiku and everything that is about it and around it.
that will be
Wonderful.
wonderful.
Yes,
Yes,
great.
Thank
Wow.
you.
Thank you
I
so
enjoyed it.
much.
It was a great talk. Yeah.
It was a
it
great
really
stuff.
was.
Great conversation. Yeah.
Yes,
Great.
and to everybody who listened to us and chimed in, joined the conversation within whether by commenting or just talking with us. Thank you so very much. So it is already 2 minutes past 9 o'clock, and we want to let everybody go because it's Wednesday. It's a working day here,
Yes.
and also we want to let Carlos go to bed because it's past midnight in Spain now.
2 a.m.
But we'll have Carlos with us again. So please stay tuned, follow us, and have a great day and a great reminder of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hasta la
everybody, for
vista.
coming and for participating. Ren and Yuka, as always.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you so very
ありがとうご
much.
ざいます。
ありがとうございます。
お疲れ様でした。お疲れ様でした。
Wonderful.